It's amazing what gets us up and around and on the road to get to work in life. We are not fully dependent on our ability to get up and get moving down the road so that the work continues. Some of you may have a natural alarm set within your body and wake up. I know farmers and people who've worked shift work for many, many years just automatically maybe wake up without an alarm. But many of us need something to, first of all, wake us up. If we wake up and we have the breath of life, we're already blessed, and we have a chance to go forward and do God's work in this world. If we have woken up with food and shelter and clothing, we are blessed, and we have an opportunity to go forth and share that love with others. If you're a child, sometimes we have to rely on mom and dad to maybe wake us up, get us breakfast, and get us out the door. Eventually, we hope there has been a responsibility and imprinting from a parent to a child so that the child eventually becomes sufficient in getting themselves up and around and on their way. Imprinted by good leadership, a child learns to be responsible. Sometimes as we get ready to go, we are not in our best space. We struggle, and we find a clouded vision ahead of us. This morning when I woke up, I was exhausted from yesterday. Last week was a very difficult week in the midst of our congregation, and I was beat. I said out loud last night, I don't want to go to church today, and I didn't. I was just done. I got out to the car, and I was dragging a little bit, you see, and I realized there was a heavy spring frost, and it already cut it a little bit close. And so what's the quickest way to get rid of a spring frost if you don't want to scrape? What do? Spray. So you turn the sprayer on in the windshield, and it kind of knocks that frost off. But what happens when it's cold enough and you keep driving? It refreezes. And so sometimes we try to take shortcuts. The shortcuts aren't always as great as they could be. For a while, you could have seen me driving down the road with my head out the window, getting to church. That's not comfortable. But we want to get to work, we want to get there, and sometimes our vision is blocked and we don't quite have the right vision ahead of us. We've got to figure out a way to get that cleared up. Jesus is on his way to work. He's on his way to Jerusalem, and on his trip to Jerusalem, he is warned by a Pharisee, which is a little bit shocking. The Pharisees, typically in the Gospel of Luke, especially, all the Gospels, they're not Jesus's friend. They don't like Jesus. They don't want Jesus to continue to talk the way he's talking about the synagogue and the law and the prophets, because Jesus is changing it all. Jesus is changing it from a set of rules and what we must do to a set of love, grace, and forgiveness offered through him. Do you know Jesus said the most profound thing to his believers? He said, whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth is loosed in heaven. In that single statement, Jesus has said, the problem oftentimes with humanity is us. It's what we hang on to. Jesus gave every authority in that statement to unloose things, which is rabbinic language. Rabbis, they were the ones who would decide how the law was bound, or if there was a question, they would say, you're guilty, you did this wrong. That's called binding the law. Or if it was loosed or set free, they would listen to the case and say, all is well, doesn't apply, you have not violated. It's loosed. Many people do not understand that Jesus literally gave the world permission. Whatever you bind is bound. Whatever you loose is loosed. Just like 3 weeks ago when we hear Jesus tell us, pray for your enemies, give away your shirt if someone steals your coat, don't loan money to people you think you're going to get it back to. The words of Jesus are not easy to listen to and follow. That is why he came. He came to transform, change, and make all things new. He came to gather all people to himself. This is what the work was, and the Pharisees don't want to see it continue. So they tell Jesus, Herod wants to kill you. I don't know if it's a warning or a threat, but Jesus' response is beautiful. Jesus says, tell that fox, I will be here today, tomorrow, and the next day. I have people to heal. And then after that, I need to be on my way to Jerusalem. Sometimes when we hear people tell us, you better not do that, you better not act this way, you better not bring this, we would do well to respond in a loving, healing, determined way, just as Jesus said, I will not be chased away. I will not go away. The healing that God wants for the world is vast, and we are called to be that healing in the church. And we'll hear more about that from Jesus in a second. I think of others who have been threatened in the history of our country. There was a long time where racism and slavery was okay, and it took much work from the abolitionists to come along and diminish and find civil rights for African Americans. All those people were threatened. All were told to go away. In our culture today, we would think it is hideous to have slaves. There are still slaves in our culture. It's a little bit underground more. There's women who are forced to work in a sex slave trade. There's debt, which kind of enslaves many of us because we think we need more than we do, and we get caught in that. And we're forced to live a life to do nothing more than to pay back debt. I think of the women's rights movement, first of all, to get the right to vote. It took a lot. Women were threatened. They did not go away. They did their work. The church certainly did not lead either one of those two charges. The church lagged behind, but I think now we're happy women vote, aren't we? All of you women should say yes. We're still about finding the rights for everyone. We're still about that work because people still need protection. What happens when people get the wrong idea in their mind about a group or a culture would be things like in New Zealand, where 50 people were gunned down because they were Islamic and they needed to be killed because the country needed to be purified from immigrants. These are not the things Jesus encourages of us. Jesus encourages the steady path forward. Though, like driving to work this morning, we may at one moment have clear vision, and the next thing you know, we've got cloudy vision again. It's okay to have that. But we are to be clear on the clear vision of Christ. His determination to come to Jerusalem, to be on the path that the work may continue, to not be diminished against the threat, fear, and ignorance of others, just because they want it to be the way it always was. Jesus walked firmly past that threat, continuing his trip to Jerusalem. As he approaches Jerusalem, he says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, oh, the city that kills and stones the prophet." He knows he is headed to die because he says it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Jesus knows where he's going and what's going to happen. But then he says the most beautiful thing. He says, "Oh, Jerusalem, how I have longed like a mother hen to want to outstretch my arms and encompass you to protect you." And then the next sentence, Jesus says, "But you were not willing." The resistance came from those being offered the love and protection of Jesus. I'm not sure if you've ever seen a mother hen protecting her chicks. I'm not a farmer, so it's not a common scene, but I've seen it a few times in real life. If you've seen a mama, a duck or chicken, or even a big bird, just protecting its little birds. That often happens in, for example, the time of a predator, say like a fox, like Herod was called, a fox. And so the bird protects the young ones from predators, but also maybe from driving rain, uncomfortable temperatures, any other element of danger. And the bird is trying to keep safe all around her, imprinting upon them the ability to go forth and have offspring and do the same. You've heard the term imprinting. It's when a young bird sees an older bird and watches the modeled behavior. I don't think it's a mistake that Jesus says, "I want to reach out my arms to you." In a way, I think Jesus is saying that you may imprint upon me. And yet, in that effort to share a radical love and grace, what is the response of the city of Jerusalem and the church within is a refusal. We do not want it. Jesus is not deterred. Jesus will continue. I tried to think of a couple of other images that might help us in terms of that bird, that mother hen with the chicks. That's beautiful. But I also thought maybe of a coach with his team that just lost their final game, a big playoff, and they're all crying, and the coach is consoling them. He's got them to give them grace and peace. Maybe even a music director of a play or something where something really went wrong with a play, and the music director is just like, "It's okay," and just giving them comfort. Or a mom and a dad whose child is heartbroken for some reason, to gather around them, to protect them, to give them love, nurture, and nourishment. I tried to think of a bigger idea, and I tried to think of the government. I've already named the leadership of people who led the abolition in the women's movement. I didn't say the leaders, but those are examples of a bigger picture, national. I thought of George W. Bush at the rubble and ruins of 9/11 towers as he grabbed a bullhorn and tried to speak a word of encouragement to a country who had been attacked and broken. Maybe even, I forgot the president, but whoever gave the speech after Pearl Harbor was bombed also tried to speak a word of encouragement to a larger nation. FDR. And on a world scene, sometimes there's a world leader who is so profound to bring peace and justice to the world, like maybe the Dalai Lama, maybe the Book of Forgiveness author. Okay. Desmond Tutu, thanks. Thank you. I should know that. Jesus is that figure for all of us, especially for the church. And as we see the images, they often come to mind in the face of danger, harm. I watched this church do that in the last 3 days as we reached out to a young 25-year-old man who took his own life, and his family needed the loving arms of the church to open up and welcome that entire family and all who were associated with that family to this place. Allison canceled her vacation over her birthday and special things to stay and do a bulletin. This was set up and down twice as much as it needed to be because they wanted this place to look clean. The ladies took down all of that stuff for sale twice, removed it. That entire place was reset and set back up the way it is. It was amazing. Food came out of nowhere. It was amazing. We did not know what the response would be from the family, but we watched a tremendous response of a church that has imprinted to this idea of Jesus that says, all are welcome. We are here to heal. We will feed you because we love you and we welcome you. This place is growing and will keep growing as a place of healing for our community. That will be the loudest message preached that you hear, that all are welcome, and we bring God's grace and healing, and we do not decide who sits with us or who is not worthy to sit with us. It is about living into and imprinting to Jesus, who uses this image of a hen wanting to gather all in spite of the refusal. Jesus says to Jerusalem, even though he has been rejected, you will see me and you will say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That refers to Palm Sunday, because the work Jesus is on continues. He comes on Palm Sunday. Indeed, they say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And then he goes to the cross. And once again, like a hen who tries desperately to reach out and gather all, Jesus stretches out on the cross and dies. Dies so that we can't ruin his message. Dies so that we can refuse, but we can't change what happened. Dies to give us this radical gift of his life, and then is resurrected from the dead to give us hope and vision and direction. And yet we are the very church, and we refuse and don't want all of this change. And it is okay, because we are only human. Even the pastor has a clear vision for a moment and then gets clouded in the chill of life as I drove to work. But you know what I kept doing this morning? I just kept hitting the wash button. And I got to work. I just had to keep hitting the wash button, you know? The wash button. The wash button. The waters that, in spite of our refusal and pain, in the brokenness of a grieving family, find us working together, sacrificing to give love and care, and that clears our vision again for the next 20 feet. We're encouraged to keep going back to the water as much as we need. But even if we fail and we've got to pull over and stop and remain, it's okay, because Jesus did his work, stretching out his arms to make sure that we all understood the gifts of God are free. And our job is to imprint upon that message and share that love and continue as you have demonstrated in the past, not just in the last 13 years while I've been here, but the last almost 80 years that you have been a congregation, to be the presence of Christ in a community that has imprinted upon Jesus to share his love and grace. That is good news, to be able to preach on a day when I didn't want to go to church. And it is amazing what has happened between 8 o'clock and now. I've remembered the message myself. I have been lifted by the music and the people around in worship. And I once again have a clear vision because I remembered this water and that table and that all are welcome. I pray when your vision gets blurry, you can remember the same. Amen.